Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I'm Edgar Ramirez. I am a member of APRESID, and it is an honor to be here moderating this panel because we've been already in conversations with the European Union and with Germany. Welcome you all. And as you know, the topic for today's presentation is, are we ready to comply with the EUDR? And I know that many people know what this is, but since we might have people who do not know anything about the EUDR, I would like for you, Sabi, to give us an overview about the EUDR and why this was created, when it should have been into force, and why wasn't it, and when it would be effectively into force. Yeah, thank you, Edgar, and thank you, Apresid, for your invitation. And EUDR is known as Zero Deforestation Regulation. But for you to know more about what this access to market requirement means, well, first of all, yeah, it is a zero deforestation requirement for production of specific products, among which we have beef, wood, and soy, but there are other products as well. And also, there might be other products being included, which is very important for us to highlight. And we need to prove deforestation zero in the full life cycle analysis from the productive unit with full traceability and with a chain of custody of 100% of segregation. That is the first part. Then we have subheadings. We also need to prove due diligence in a very wide matter, including originary peoples, human rights, labor rights, complying with local environmental laws in case of deforestation and native forestation, use of property. So there is a socio-environmental due diligence that we will need to do because we need to know that the products that we are exporting and the Europe is going to be importing, being criminally liable there, all of this is being complied with. This legislation comes from a very important international context, which is the Paris Agreement, where we have a climate commitment. And there we have a very wide gap in terms of times and commitment. And this is why countries are adding more regulations. And also we have EUDR, which is not the only regulation in Europe or outside Europe, because there are other markets also imposing the same requirements. And very briefly, let me tell you, after a long time, this will be into force after December 31st, 2025. Therefore, our exports after that date shall comply with this in environmental and social terms and also with zero deforestation. Marnix, since last year, there was a summit in Iguazu with Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, and European countries in the German-Argentinian dialogue. And this year, we had another summit with the EU and NGOs. Bolivia was invited too. The same stakeholders from Mercosur and Europe participated as well. But last year, this regulation did not go into force. So what can you tell us about the new progress that there might have been from last year to this time of the year, and what we might encounter from now on in order to be ready to comply with this regulation? Well, we got together first last year with many uncertainties, and we detected several topics that were important, systems that could connect one to the other, systems that could guarantee the traceability. And back then, we realized that there was a lot of work to be done. We conducted an analysis to see what was happening. And in Argentina, there is a system to comply with EUDR. And if you compare this with the global level and also the same European countries, where their very own farmers also have to comply with that same regulation, Argentina, in the Ministry of Finance, they did their homework, and I see that Argentina is more than ready, regardless of the fact that there are things that cannot be answered because the EU has not given instructions. Therefore, today, we can just say that as of January 1st, this will be implemented, and we'll probably not be able to comply with it because chains are so complex that it will be very hard to comply with so specific requirements in a short span of time. So probably I'll believe that we'll have a more gradual implementation because Argentina and all over the world, we see that reality moves faster than the implementation of public policies. And I believe that here we have another example of that. So in May, we thought that the countries in Mercosur, with Argentina leading the group, implemented a system to comply with it, but there is uncertainty, not related only to Argentina, but to the chains in general. For example, there is the case of some products where we don't know what is going to happen, like animal feed. We don't know what is going to happen here. The new government in Germany also made observations about the bureaucracy and all the steps, and they requested to reduce it. So let's see what happens. But what we do know is that there is uncertainty about the interpretation. But I do believe that Argentina shall not be very worried about this because things were done the right way. And I know that you tend to criticize yourselves, but we need to recognize when you do things right. Thank you, Marnix, the European voice. And now moving into Juan. Let's skip Fede for now. Juan, representing a global company. How do you see Argentina compared to the other Mercosur countries to comply with this regulation? Hello. My first answer is yes, or fine or better. As an industry, we are a link between production and destinations, and we need to organize, and we believe that our role is to simplify the message for the farmer so that we can get everything together to take it there. I work for Latin America, and the truth is that together with BISEC and other works and all the things that we are doing at BISEC with all the controls that farmers have to go through, I would say that we are in a better position. I mean, we've been able to organize ourselves better to show all the documents that are requested from us, and this has not happened in other places. So I would say that this is a very important market opportunity because we are in a different position compared to other origins. Yeah, let's talk about the general context. Fede, as the president of a chain that has not been affected yet, and I'm saying in theory because probably this will happen. We know that this is affecting cocoa, coffee, oil, soy, but you are a farmer and you are here. So, as farmers, do you think that we are ready, or do you think that you might have any sort of certificate to give faith that you do what you say you do? Well, it's a wide question, but I would like to say something before that. I believe that many farmers are ready and some others are not because they are excluded by the system. So with this regulation that was rejected by the Argentine government and by many institutions, it is actually rejected because This is not a commercial agreement. This is an imposition by the EU following what they believe that we have to do. And this was well explained by Sabine in terms of all the requirements. And also there are so many questions around this. First of all, they do not respect national legislation, and this is why the Argentine government is against this regulation, and it was expressed in several meetings. And they are counting deforestation as of December 31st, 2020. And there are farmers that legally did this, are outside or excluded from this regulation, and they won't be able to sell their soy in this circuit. And why am I using the term circuit? Because one of the toughest issues around this that Marnix mentioned, and I believe that this is something that we should discuss now, not in December when we are ready to start, is that this certification, farmers have to enroll in many platforms for certifications. One of them is VSEC. And since there is segregation, soybean cannot be mixed with anything. It should be the farmer saying that there are storages that will send soybean, and if the soybean is going to be for the EUDR circuit, it cannot be mixed with others. Then they're going to take these to the port, and we're going to be having separate trucks. And what will happen with soy flour? With this resolution, soybean is no longer a commodity because this is specific and this needs an independent management. And I cannot mix it with soybean. And many institutions were complaining about this because it's impossible for us in Argentina to have this, and this would be very expensive as well because a storage facility cannot have in the same silo the EUDR and the non-EUDR soybean. So who will pay for all of these extra costs in ports, in transportation? Here, there are going to be two circuits created, those with the certification and those without the certification. And I'm just calculating this. In Rosario, we receive 2 million trucks per year. Imagine how complicated it is to unload the trucks, how long it takes, and all the things that happen in Rosario when a truck gets there. But now we're going to be having two different circuits, EUDR and non-EUDR. This will create delays, extra costs. So who will pay for all of those extra costs? Because now soybean is no longer a commodity, it is a specialty. And European farmers said that they're not going to pay for this. We actually asked this question, and this is what they told us. So once again, we see the farmer assuming all these costs for all these new operations. And yeah, I believe that this is quite controversial, and we need to keep on discussing this. Those who will get the certificate will do it, and those who will not, will not. But there are many things that they need to do. Geo-references, extra controls, and if they are above the right numbers of production, they will have to provide explanations. So there are so many issues arising from this that are very complex, which are impositions, and I believe that they are ignorant of the productive reality of the country. I believe that certificates are very important, and it's great for us to show the world what we do, what is our carbon footprint, but I do believe that here we have a very high political cost, and I am being respectful when I say this. This is a political move from the European Union, and this is not sustainability, because there are other ways to talk about sustainability. There are many things or many ways for us to show and portray our sustainability. I believe that this generates lots of doubts, There are other certifications that are fine because they are not impositions. They are ways to show that the Argentine production has enough autonomy and decision-making power to do what it wants to do. But if we really want to see sustainability, I do not believe that this sort of politically stained move is the right one. I hear the word certification very often, and I would like to go back to something. You talk a lot about the European Union. And as Sabine explained, we live in a globalized world where in 2008, presidents from all over the world signed an agreement, right? And the president of Argentina signed that agreement too. The commitment was to stop deforestation up to 2030. 4 years ago, nobody had complied with this. Therefore, the civil society went to Brussels to the democratically elected parliament. And sometimes we forget this, but this is a democratic model. And we know that the European model might be quite strange, but still, for hundreds of years, there were wars. And now there is a not perfect, but a good process that generates welfare and democracy. So there's a process coming from consumers requesting and saying, we do not want to be responsible for the deforestation in the world, even though in Europe things were already stopped. But yeah, that's it. This became a regulation. So what does the EU say? We are going to force any company in our territory to follow our regulations. So any product entering the EU shall prove that it did not affect human rights or deforestation. This is the only point in this regulation. It is literally written that you do not need any certification whatsoever. The only thing that you need to prove in the private sector is this, okay? And this is a different perspective compared to the one in Latin America, where the state enforces things and then controls them as well. In Europe, they are giving this responsibility to the industry and say, prove it. Then I'll tell you whether it's fine or not. So there's no need for any certification. The only request is for your colleagues all over the ocean to receive this paper sign where it reads that you've complied with our request. Sorry, Federico, I want this to be a conversation. Can I finish? Can I answer? Yeah. Well, there are many issues happening here. Marnix is talking about that we need to prove that we are complying with human rights law and no child labor. Well, that depends on the country of origin. I will not go to Europe to ask them how they produce this or that. I feel like I cannot jump into what is happening in other countries to buy a product. I feel like this is a personal issue. And we are saying that as of next year, Europe wants to discuss other things too, because Europe is trying to control what is happening in other places. And I don't know if this will be in January or when, as Sabine said. They want to start discussing the use of pastures. And why does Europe think that they have a voice in what is happening here? I mean, are we going to be having someone from Brussels coming down here and telling us what to do? I believe that there is a political facet to all of this, and this is not the sort of system that I would choose for certification. Thank you.
Let's go back to the topic of the panel and not think of what might happen with wetlands or pastures. And before passing the floor to Sabine, what Marnix mentioned, a question to you, Juan. I mean, you're wearing a dual hat. You sell here, but your company buys in Europe, so you are part of this. So as to the title of this panel, are we prepared? I mean, what does your European side, what does he demand from your Argentinian side? I want to be correct in my choice of words. When we prepare the panel, we said, okay, you have a peer that will understand you, but our peer in Europe is much worse than the Association of Pet Food here, because the fines are huge. And so everybody that is sending products to Europe, and this is not a certification. I perfectly understand what you mean. I understand what you're saying. This is not technically a certification because they say, prove it to me. So one of the aspects and the big discussions we have internally is how we explain this. And these are struggles. When you said this was going to be easier for us, this is more difficult because if we were not on both sides, there would be no EUDR but the work in the past 2 years have has been internal discussions to say, with what we have in Argentina, don't ask for more. The Argentine producers are ready. They do things well. They are legally correct. With what we have, we can already show it. And this is a big discussion we have internally. And then I have another comment. But to answer that question, this is a very strong internal struggle. We are running tests. We are proven this. We are in the right direction. We are showing, the different embassies, and we are in the right direction. Thank you. Sabine. First, in order to complete this idea of certification or due diligence, this is a due diligence regulation. It's not certification, because all of us in the soybean chain perhaps know the renewable energies regulation. The regulation worked on certifications. There are recognized schemes by a competent authority in Europe. And if I show you the certificate, I show them the certificate that is enough, like SSA, any other certification that is recognized. But what happened? When the assessment was made, because this has more than 15 years of history in Europe, the first thing they said is we're not going to make the same mistakes we made with other regulations. And we don't want to find a fraud in third-party certification. So we're going to ask you in this new regulation that learns of the renewable energy regulation, the one on wood, that will also come into force after the EUDR, show me a document that will allow you to confirm that you conform to the requirement that I'm going to ask to a subject within the EU. The requirements do not fall on the operators in Argentina, Uruguay, Bolivia, etc. The requirement falls on the European side of Juan, for instance. So his European side goes to his Argentinian side and says, these are the requirements that I have. And what the Commission has done in the past 3 years is be propositional. And I always say the same. There's a list of material requirements of the requirement: human rights, labor rights, free consent, indigenous populations. I'm not saying they don't say how to show it. And we are over-regulated in this country. There's a number of records and information we give to the public sector that can be used and mature for this case. That is the exercise that Juan mentioned that has been done in the past few years, using public goods registers that are already being used to present them as a verification in order to comply with this and add environmental value to our production. That is the big challenge we have as an industry, differentiating ourselves. And many exporters have mentioned this. We are moving forward very well. It was not easy. It was not easy at all. But now we are in such a good position that if we have too much demand, we are not going to have sufficient supply. And that is the idea, to differentiate ourselves based on social and environmental attributes and gain new markets. That is the most important public-private strategy in Argentina. And it's very important to be clear about the difference. This is a due diligence process. And it's not that we're going to spoil the next chapters, but this is not the only regulation from Europe that is coming. Anyway, if there are farmers, producers here in the room, remember with the CGT, the famous CGT, and how we complained about it. But today, I mean, we've managed to do it. We've managed to use those bills of lading. Now, the bill of lading in Argentina has an annex where you can enter the REDSPA. So we have all the batches geolocalized. You were the advisor that played in different parts of the field, public, private, advising, or doing reports on this regulation. You're involved with VSEC. Can you tell us what VSEC is? And now that you know about it, what are the strengths and weaknesses of VSEC? Well, that's truly an exercise that in the past few years with the Argentine-German dialogue and the RECAF and ICA, we've worked to see how the region is getting ready for this, and particularly learn from the lessons. Today, I'm participating in countries that have just started, so we share that experience so they don't make the same mistakes. I know it's an initiative that has been on for years now. It's a sectorial, private initiative, but it's recognized through the Board of Attributes for Differentiation today under the Undersecretary of Markets and the Secretary of Agriculture of the Ministry of Economy of Argentina, where they make public goods available to be used in different certification and verification schemes. So what VSEC does is a traceability system that allows you to track a product from the production unit to shipment. And it allows to show the segregation that has a certification by an independent third party, also a certification and verification of the system itself, that allows to host information in different SharePoints to show compliance with different requirements. And it also deals with the social and environmental due diligence, where we have to show the compliance with the legislation in Argentina. It's not, I mean, the only point about the cut date and the protection of the forests, that is established in the regulation. But legal compliance is that we are operating formally in Argentina. And to that, within VSEC and also with the Market Undersecretariat, they found a way to identify public goods that will allow me to show this with a very important public-private work and of the exporters as well with their stakeholders in Europe, because they also have corporate commitments that sometimes go beyond what the regulatory commitments imply. So, as Manix mentioned, there's a consumer that is demanding, a financial system, a regulatory system that is demanding, and also a climate commitment from the corporations that is very important. So, a binding agreement like the Paris Agreement or the Glasgow Agreement is not effective in their targets. That's why we have these regulations. Now, there's a lot of empty spaces and gray areas, that's for sure, but VSEC today at the regional level is the most complete system, and it's the one that is having recognition today with public-private representation throughout the embassies and also the delegation to the European Union. It has recognition from the authorities, and they're accepting the national public goods to show compliance. A question to the panel. When the second summit was held about the EUDR here in Buenos Aires, the benchmark from the EU was issued as Argentina as a standard risk country. Of course, we don't like the category we were given because they put us in the same bag as Cuba or the Central African Republic, and we know that socially we are not the same, but we have different perceptions. The question is, what is Argentina doing from the public-private side to try to modify that categorization from the EU? Well, that score from the European context, I can answer. Well, the report sent from Argentina was very good. There were meetings in Brussels. I think the ministry did everything they had to do very correctly. The European Parliament sent a letter to the Commission saying that the scoring was not based on scientific arguments, and there are 10 more points criticizing what was done. And also, from the point of view of the German government, there's this question about the bureaucracy. There are very strong signals that Argentina did their job, but internally in the EU, there's a lot of protests as well against what was done. Because, as the parliament themselves said, it was not a sound result. You cannot compare the Central African Republic, Cuba, Argentina, and Brazil at the same level. Unfortunately, it was not properly done. I know there's always mistakes, let's put it like that. I've been in contact with the Secretariat at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They are working very well, trying to analyze how Argentina can be recategorized as a low-risk country. I'm always negative in this panel, but I think it's a very political discussion because the US was there, Europe also, and all those countries. And the recategorization was, in my opinion, they put us in a middle risk country. And this is very complex because if you go and buy something from a country that has more, where would you prefer to buy anything? In the country that has a lower level of risk. So having Argentina as a country with a higher risk than the US, the importer from Europe will prefer to buy soybeans from the States because they have a lower risk and they will have fewer controls and requirements than the Argentinian soybean. Perhaps we don't have the strength that other countries have in the negotiation. We thought we should be low risk, but we were punished, let's say, and we complained a lot. And also many complaints came from Europe, as Manik said. And this should not be ignored because otherwise we're always punished because we are not strong enough in the negotiations. But we are working at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs very well, also at the Secretariat of Agriculture. And having a different risk level compared to other countries is not free when we could be perfectly a low-risk country. Yeah, it's good to mention this. This exercise of the categories is a competence of the EU. They have a methodology that has been published. The methodology is based on 3 qualitative indicators and 5 or 6 qualitative indicators. So first, those 3 quantitative indicators, that is deforestation rate and farming expansion per product, is based on the information that appears at the FAO FRAD, the FAO FRAD. So this it has thresholds. If you cross the threshold, your level of risk improved, and the high risk level was for those countries that had some point of sanction from the UN Security Council or the European Council. The thing is that the middle part was too wide, and in this first categorization exercise that was delayed a lot, it was launched mid this year, and they have announced that they are going to do another exercise. It's not a one-time thing. It's a snapshot that they will keep taking. What the Commission established, that's why the exercise was very important for Argentina, is that the countries from a bilateral perspective can present information to modify that category. Of course, in this first categorization, I said it was not a satisfactory exercise. As he said, it's not working well because there's no way Argentina is classified in this very wide corridor of the middle. As when you say kids at school, you have a poor grade, but he did worse and he has a better grade. Well, perhaps your grade is good, but his grade is not good, but you're not going to say that so as not to be a poor friend with him. That is an exercise we have to keep working on from the public and private side. And in that exercise of presenting information, that's information that the countries can provide to the Commission to support a new categorization. The next data from FAO will be published in October, so we have to keep showing and we have to keep doing this diplomatic exercise of presenting information, and that information must be based on science and on regulations, because here we have to show that our legal framework is robust enough to have a typical risk. What due diligence does is map what you have, what I comply with, present mitigation measures, and then say, how can I remediate if I mess up? That is the due diligence. So it's important to communicate that we're doing things well. So we try to adapt. I wish we didn't have to explain so much, as Federico said, but we can also see this. If there are many in the middle and you stand out, it can be a business opportunity. I think not everything is 100% negative. If you stand out of this platoon, you can be better. Of course, it's better to be in low risk, but there's always opportunities. And also, the different levels of risk doesn't mean that you don't have to comply with things. The simplification of the due diligence is because having zero risk, typical risk, low level of risk, you will have to present the information, but you don't have to present mitigation plans. And then if you are in standard or high risk, you have to present mitigation plans, and your verification moves from 4 to 9%. That's the only difference. That is, compliance has to be shown anyway. It's like when you obtain a passport and you want to go into a country. They say if you've been in such and such a country, if you have a criminal record, you're not coming in. This is the same for a product. Now, thinking of the chains that affect us in Argentina, perhaps here we still lack the meat side, but thinking aloud and what we've been seeing in the summits, Europe cannot do away with the soybeans from South America. And the US, as you said, does not have the capacity to supply them. So this, as Manik said, let's see how this comes about after January 1st. But the soybean market is difficult to be replaced with another protein. But let's go back to the panel. When at APRESID we wanted to have this panel, we wanted it to be wider and speak about the new European regulations. It ended up being specifically EUDR because this was most important now, but perhaps it can be the tip of the iceberg for other regulations. And you mentioned something, Sabine. So I would like to ask you, Marnix, as the European voice, although Sabine mentioned it many times and she explained it was due diligence, could you explain, in your opinion, from the European side, how can it affect countries in the Mercosur, this due diligence? I think that one of the things I have discovered in these 4 years, I've been in Latin America for over 20 years, but now 4 years here in Argentina. I think that we are not very good at understanding. We have the perception and a strong identification with Europe because most of your grandparents came from there. But Argentina is Argentina. Europe is not Europe. That's one of the problems, and I think it's very difficult to understand. I think we have to understand that there are consumers, there are movements in Europe that are asking for things. We are having a change of administration in Germany, where there was a Green Party. There's a strong movement towards organic farming, agroecology. I'm not saying whether it's good or not, but people vote in a democratic state and they choose a lifestyle. If you go to breakfast in a hotel in Germany, the apple juice is organic, yogurt is vegan. It's lousy. I don't like it at all. But so it's very difficult to imagine from here, 13,000 kilometers away, how the mind works and how society works in Europe. And the same thing around. If you talk to a German person, and with Edgar, we discussed from the beginning of the project, he speaks of Argentina. Well, I'm Dutch, and in the train station in Amsterdam, the first thing you see is not a Dutch restaurant. It's an Argentinian restaurant. So Argentina for Europeans is great beef, and it produces genetically modified soybeans with a lot of glyphosate.
And Patagonia, an amazing place for holidays because it's beautiful. You laugh about this, but our mind works with images that we build as societies. So right now in Europe, there's a movement saying we generated a lot of wealth all over the world. This is not the exact words, but this is their fear. And we do not want, as a society, keep on being responsible for depleting natural resources all over the world. So we invested a lot in financial aids and international cooperation, but something is still not working. So if we can set laws and international standards, but still they do not work, let's take a different path. And we are just saying to large companies and those powers competing in this world, guys, you need to be responsible for your production. And if you are not doing this the right way, you'll be punished because unfortunately, I mean, if Argentina is doing things right, if Russia is doing things right, if India is doing things right, I mean, we don't know. So we just need to control what you do. And today, John Deere and any other companies, the EU said the data generated by machines belong to farmers. So you, John Deere, want to innovate? You need to compensate farmers for their data. So if you want to use their data, you need to ask for permission. And in environmental matters, we have due diligence, not only related to EUDR, but also in terms of human rights, environmental matters, and corporate social responsibility. So something that will happen, and you will have to deal with this with your colleagues, is if a company has more than 1,000 employees and this much in sales, when you will need to prove that you are treating the entire chain the right way. And to SMEs, prove that you are paying taxes, you are paying the right salaries, because European consumers don't want to be liable for all this. So in Europe, when talking about EUDR and similar legislation, the British, people in Norway, people in Canada, in the US, and in China, they are all working in plans and schemes which are voluntary yet, but pointing into that direction. So we are talking about the EU because yesterday people said that the EU is leading the environmental agenda, and it is a partial truth because it's a trend all over the world. And it's important for us to understand that it's not that we are just punishing Argentinians, you know? The colleague in the Bavarian region with 10 cows will have to comply with those exact same regulations. So one thing is due diligence. Sabine did a report that you can find online, but maybe you can tell about that. Yeah, Marnix, I'm trying to be respectful here, but this is not personal. We know each other and we have had several arguments. But don't you think this is risky, having someone coming from 13,000 kilometers away? And I was in the European Union, I went to Geneva, to the European Parliament. I had discussions with them, but it's very hard because they are not farmers. So having them telling us how to produce here, 13,000 kilometers away, in our soil, with our weather, this is why I am against to these impositions. This is not the right type of certification. And if we play this game and we allow them to have an opinion, to have a say on this, I mean, if I'm going to purchase a car, I'm not going to be asked whether the exhaust pipe was manufactured in India and what are the materials. So if we decide to play this game, we might be in a very complicated situation. Because if not, we will try to find other markets. And if not, we'll have to comply this because I'm a farmer. And if I cannot sell my soybean, I mean, I do certifications. But I believe that this sort of EUDR is vulnerating the rights of our country. And this is tough. But I feel that there's hypocrisy here, because you are impacting small farmers in Chaco, and we see all the planes traveling all over Europe. So you are only paying attention to what you want to see. So the agricultural sector shall raise their voice to try and be respected when we know that 75% of gases are created by the energy sector. So we need to change that narrative and defend our position, because if not, they are going to force us to stop producing. We do not have the European subsidies here, and we do not have their system. And I would love to discuss sustainability. And I feel that what we need to be certifying is sustainability and not these political issues where they're just blaming the sector because their system needs to find someone to blame. And sometimes we just feel guilty in this sector. However, we are just the scapegoat here. So I believe that this is not about EUDR, soybean or not. We need to be strong as the sector. This is a global discussion, and we need to stop taking the blame for all of these issues. They are imposing these political restrictions on us, and this is my personal opinion. They are trying to put away their blame, and they're blaming this on the agricultural sector. So I feel this is a very complex topic. That is a very high-level discussion. But beyond what Federico just mentioned, we see this as an opportunity. I feel like Federico's words, and I'm not judging, he is saying that this is an imposition, but well, this is how the market works. If no one in Argentina signs up for this, then probably this guy in the Bavarian region that wants vegan yogurt will stop eating it. But the thing is that they're going to be like, okay, I cannot pay for these prices because prices are going to be too much if no one follows that. Today we have a very high demand. We have the opportunity, and this is not an obligation. We are not forced to do this. And I mean, Europe is an important market for Argentina, and I would say that after what I said at the beginning, that other neighboring countries are not ready, we have the potential of having a huge demand. And this will be done by those who feel comfortable by doing it, because there are people who will be willing to do it to meet their goals. But this is why I do not see this as an imposition. But you want to do it, there's a large market for you to benefit from. As a country, we are organized. As Sabine said, we had very good standards. VISEC is helping us in that organization. And what you are presenting just once or submitting just once before VISEC is useful for all companies. So I feel like we are very close to capturing that potential value. And Europeans will say, I will not pay, but we know that if they do not get the product from Brazil or the US, they will come and pay. So I would like to have a more optimistic perspective here. There's a chance here. We are all working hard. We have the tools. But to capture this, we all need to be on board, Because if we are not on board, we are going to be halfway. Well, before giving you the floor, do you see when you have something to say and you are just ready to discuss that? I don't know if this is an expression of desire, but probably there's going to be an EU-Mercosur agreement being launched very soon, and that agreement is with the entire Mercosur, not just with Argentina. But you said that Argentina is in a better position compared to the Mercosur neighbors. And if this agreement is finally launched, we would have many competitive advantages. At least that's my opinion. But then we would need to be aligned with our Mercosur neighbors. And we know that they are not at the same level as we are. So this strength that you see today, what will happen in the case of the agreement being approved? Well, it will not change. I don't want to name names, but Paraguay, I mean, there's a soybean flow from Paraguay to Argentina and from Argentina to Europe. With the agreement, that doesn't mean that everything will be sent. We're going to be sending those commodities that we feel that we can send. And this is why I was saying that we know everyone's situation. And yeah, the agreement is external to this, but if we do not comply with the regulation, it's not that the countries will be at a different position. And please correct me if I'm wrong, Sabine. We are working in order to be able to prove what Federico said. We know that we do things the right way. We're trying to show that we comply with that. If a neighboring country, if the Juan Urrutia from Paraguay cannot prove that, we won't be able to buy their soybean, and the soybean in Paraguay will cost less than in Argentina. That's what I'm referring to when I am talking about an opportunity moving forward. Yeah, and the countries in the Mercosur are also doing things, right? It's not just that Argentina is working on this. Uruguay, Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina, and Bolivia also are working towards traceability systems with chains of custody, with due diligence. They're all doing their legality matrix to see how to comply with this. Therefore, we do need to highlight that comparing all these schemes under development stage, VISEC is in the best position. It's like we are winning the race, but we are not happy about it. Therefore, we need to know that we have a huge challenge ahead. We can be pioneers here in something that we've been working for a long time on. So we have a differentiating value here. And I would like to explain what does this mean. Bill of lading, you all need to comply with that because you cannot export without the bill of lading. In the bill of lading for operations, you will need to be registered at RENSPA. This is something that you all do, so this is something that you have to do to operate in Argentina. So those are the first two most important documents. And in the case of VISEC, there's a satellite image system and evaluation that is probably the most important component in the system, where through different images, you can compare your land comparing today's date and the cut date. And that is a requirement from the market 2020, and I compare the differences. Changes in the use of soil. This is something that we all need to submit, because if not, we will not be operating legally. And in VISEC, for compliance in terms of labor and human rights, we are working with the RENATRA in order to obtain a certification showing who is complying or not. And it is a very long matrix. Yeah, trade unions, taxes, salaries, human rights. So there is a way to show who are the farmers complying with all this and who are not complying. And that's an easy way to prove all this, because there's not only one document to prove that. And exporting companies are adding their compliance codes and their ethic codes, and they already have that from a corporate perspective. And then in fiscal terms, exporters have their affidavits for sales to foreign countries, so all that fiscal or tax burden is already covered. And also from the tax perspective, they just need to comply with the legal framework, because VSEC is making sure that there is no productive units in a conflict. And this is done also because we do not have an annual sweep in the Institute of Originary or Native Peoples to make sure that this is not happening. And with that, we are showing the compliance of due diligence. So again, we have a regulation in Argentina. We are over-regulated as farmers in Argentina. So to that regulation that we have, if we comply with it, we can get a double benefit out of it because we will be able to enter this EUDR circuit. And also, this is not just the idea of the EU. The USA, the UK, and also there are contracts in China that are including these EUDR considerations because there's this contagious effect with the rest of the contracts. Well, we have 3 more minutes, so Marnix, Fede, and Juan, in 1 minute, can you make closing remarks? Yeah, let me just say that this is an opportunity, that we are in a good position. And you said, what are the weak points of VSEC? We are not massive yet. And I feel that that's it. We all need to be on board because that will make it stronger. And we are sure that this is robust. But yeah, we need unity and we all need to be in this together. This is why it's good for me to be here and to explain that this is not terrifying. This is a business opportunity, and if we are on board, it will be fine. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going to insist on this, and I'm going to give you an example of something that really impacted me. When we worked with our colleagues from Paraguay, in the north of Paraguay, because of agriculture, poverty was reduced from 75% to 25%. So other countries see this, and there were places where there was nothing, and now there are highways, hospitals, schools. So who can question that? Therefore, I feel that we need to find a way to prove our reality in Argentina, in Brazil, and in Paraguay. And I am sure that Europeans are not against that, but they are questioning production from their perspective. And people in Paraguay was telling us agricultural development really changed the life of the population here. So it would be good for us to be able to portray that, how people were able to get more rights out of all of this. That's it. Thank you. Marnix, the last minute.
Bueno, para cerrar,
And now to conclude, when I was a little younger, like 30 years ago, there was a pollution in Germany of tomatoes 30 years ago. It took them 2 hours to find what greenhouse in Holland had produced that tomato, what row. So traceability is not new. Perhaps this is a sector where perhaps we are more used to informality, and I think if we come back here 5 years from now and you ask my neighbor, how much more efficiently are you operating because you had to do this exercise? And if we sit with Bunge's people to see how much better their process operates because they discovered inefficiencies in production, we will see that traceability at the end of the day is beneficial because the chains are more transparent, and it finally helps competitiveness. And perhaps public policies, but everything can be improved, and I think we're going to see the benefits of this. I take the challenge. So we'll see you 5 years from now. And now to conclude and to summarize what we've been discussing, I think this is not an imposition or para tariff barriers. These are conditions that a seller should meet in order to enter a market. That seller can choose to enter that market or look for another one. I always say, and I give the example, when as buyers we want to buy the meat we're going to have on Sunday, we choose what part to buy. When we buy a truck, we want to choose the engine, the color, the brand. We don't choose the one that is available at the dealers. So we also should have that possibility, putting ourselves in the position of what the buyers want to buy and be prepared to offer that, because as Juan said, the opportunities are much more. And as I said, the plane is made as it flies, and then soybean will become a specialty if it has all the traceability and the certificates of origin. Thank you to the panelists for being so easy, and thank you for staying to the end.